Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
We've got a very interesting show for you today.
You may have heard the story of Corrie ten Boom. Very popular story. She was had gone through Nazi Germany and had gone through the concentration camps, and her entire family had been killed in the concentration camps.
She was the only one that survived.
It was terrible.
She was a kid. And the reason that they captured her, they were living in Holland, and they were harboring people who the Nazis were looking for, Jews and other people as well. And the Nazis caught them, put them in a concentration camp. They killed the dad first, then they killed the mom, and they killed the other kid. She was the youngest, and she survived.
It's hard for us to imagine that level of evil. I can't. I've certainly never encountered that level of just evil in the world.
So after World War II, Corrie ten Boom went to Germany. Germany was, of course, defeated.
Became a very popular speaker.
She was
her story.
Yes. She would go around and she would speak about some of the things that happened to her in Nazi Germany, but she would also talk about the fact that she didn't harbor a grudge against these people, that the people were not really going to continue to pull her down. She was speaking at one, and someone, after she finished her speech, came up to her. Older guy.
And she recognized him.
Yeah, heavy set. He had been a guard in the camp where she was.
Can you imagine? Can you just imagine the feelings that you would feel in that moment?
And what she told, what she said was, he came up to her and he said, I was in that camp, and she recognized him, and he said, I know what I did was wrong. Can you forgive me? He challenged her to forgive him, and she just stood there, and it took her a while to really realize what he was asking, really thinking about what she had been doing all this time and the things she remembered. What a challenge for her. And she realized that was the message she was delivering. It's the message of forgiveness.
She said, I stood there. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking?
Wow.
What a challenge.
Oh, no kidding.
What a challenge. And yet, she, having given all of these talks and had been telling people, we want to be people of forgiveness.
Corrie ten Boom died, I don't know how long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, but I can remember hearing her on the radio many times. She was interviewed many times, and she would talk about forgiveness and how she was able to do that, how she wasn't harboring a grudge. That story appears in a book called Choosing Forgiveness. It's by a woman by the name of June Hunt. And looking at this book, there's a lot of things in there about forgiveness that are interesting for us to take a look at.
Of course, for us in our podcast, we are all about cultivating positive relationships together. And as we got to talking about it, we realized it's really probably the biggest roadblock to pursuing those positive relationships is something happens. We're all humans together. And hopefully none of us have to go through anything nearly as bad as Corrie ten Boom went through. But we all go through things, sometimes big things, sometimes little things, in our relationships. And if we don't deal with them, even if it's a small thing, it can build and build and build unless we learn to cultivate the habit of forgiveness?
The first thing I think you want to understand is that forgiveness, the biggest benefit to forgiveness is that it benefits you.
It
It
does.
benefits the person who forgives. I remember speaking to someone who went to our class reunion after 40 years, I think. Sought out somebody that she remembered from high school that had just really devastated her in something she did. She sought this person out and said, in high school, you did X and Y and Z to me, and I want to tell you, I've been harboring that grudge all these years, and I want to tell you, I've given it up. I'm not harboring that grudge anymore. I forgive you. And the person said, I don't even remember that. Now, 40 years, she is thinking all of these things, and the other person has long forgotten it, even to the point where she could tell the story and she doesn't remember it.
When you're not
Who
forgiving,
suffers?
when you're not forgiving, it's like you have a rock, a stone that you're carrying a backpack, and you take the stone and you put it in your backpack. And some stones are little and some stones are big, but you add it to the backpack. And you carry that around, and maybe you've got 2 or 3 or 4, and then it grows to a dozen, and it grows to 2 dozen. You carry that around, and I use this as a metaphor, but I think from many people that I've seen that have refused to forgive, that it becomes more than a metaphor for them, where you can see it begins to actually take its toll on your body.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to just feel run down because you're carrying a metaphorical weight, but that metaphorical weight has literal bodily harm that it causes to you.
You might wonder, why are we talking about this in this podcast? Well, if you remember, our theme is cultivating positive relationships together. If you're harboring a grudge, if you've got something that you feel you can't forgive, you're creating a block. You're creating a block right there between you and the other person. It could be between you and your child. It could be between you and your dad. It could be between you and your brother or sister or your uncle or anybody you define as a part of your defined family, your relationships with those people. If there's people who haven't been accepting you and told you don't ever come back again, you walk away and they can eat on you and eat on you and eat on you. And it keeps you from having the wonderful relationship you should have.
And the block there is because it's not fair. It feels like when you have somebody that you have to forgive, it's not fair that not only did they do the thing to you, but now you have to go through and do the exercise of actually letting that go. It's not fair. It feels like I shouldn't have to do a thing. They're the ones that hurt me. I shouldn't have to then now take the step of forgiveness. This should all be on them. But if you don't forgive, not only have you suffered the first time from the thing that they've done to you, but you continue to suffer. You lengthen that suffering because now instead of taking that weight that you are now carrying and setting it down, you're choosing to continue to carry it. So you are multiplying that suffering well beyond the initial offense.
In June Hunt's book, she lists 3 things that what forgiveness is. She talks about these 3 things, and then she has a long list of what forgiveness is not. But let's start with the 3 she talks about. The 3 things that what forgiveness is. The first thing she says, forgiveness means dismissing a debt. When you forgive someone, you dismiss the debt owed to you. When you receive forgiveness, your debt is dismissed. Your debt is gone. No repayment is required. That's number one she talks about.
Some people say, I'm just having trouble forgiving. Yes, I've tried, but I just can't do it. And I think to myself, I love this imagery of it's forgiving a debt. Because imagine that somebody owed you an actual monetary debt. And you took a piece of paper and you wrote out, I forgive you your debt. I remember I had that happen when I was in my 20s. I had a friend. I was working at just an internship, barely making any money, and he took us out with there were a bunch of us, and we all went on a road trip, and he financed the whole thing, and he knew that there was no way that I was really going to be able to repay him because I had this internship with barely making any money. So he said, with all of this, forget it. I know I said you owed me all this money, but forget it. This is just not worth it. And he actually wrote out, I think he maybe printed out a little certificate and said, I forgive you this debt. Now, I imagine, let's say I had that piece of paper, and then imagine that he came back to me a month later and said, I know I gave you that piece of paper, but I still kind of feel like you owe me that money. Well, that's not how forgiveness works. Monetarily, we all understand that. And yet, for some reason, we think that when it comes to the realm of emotions, that we can say, oh, well, I forgive you, but I kind of don't. No, either you forgive or you don't.
The second thing that she points out is that forgiveness is dismissing your demand that others owe you something, especially when they fail to meet your expectations. They fail to keep a promise or fail to treat you fairly. That's forgiveness. You're forgiving them for what you have set as a standard for them. And so when you dismiss your demand from them, that is what forgiveness is.
When someone hurts you or does anything where you carry a grudge against them, you feel in the moment like you did a thing to me and it's not fair what you did to me, and I'm putting it on your account. I'm just writing it in the ledger and I'm saying, you did this thing to me and you need to put this right. And when you forgive, it's like going on that ledger and you cross that thing out and you say, I'm no longer holding that against you. You don't need to give that to me. That's no longer a thing that I'm holding over you like you did this to me.
The last thing June Hunt says forgiveness is it's dismissing or canceling or setting someone free from any consequences of falling short of a standard. You set a standard to them. I forgive you for the standard that I personally set. That is something that you're harboring in your mind. Forgive them of that. The reward is the fact that you are the one that benefits. When you forgive, you are the one that is released from the grudge, from the concern, from the urge for vengeance or any of that. It's a critical part of it. Okay, we're back with what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not based on what is fair. I remember when you and your sister were little, and whenever there was an issue between the two of you and we had to be the judge, both of you always said, it's not fair, it's not fair. Well, I can remember you said it so often that finally I looked at you and I said, whose side do you think I usually take? Oh, you always take my sister's side. So then I turned to your sister and I said, well, who do you think I favor all the time? Oh, you
She
always
said
favor my
me. Yeah.
sister. Well, I said, if you both think that, I guess it must be pretty equal. You never argued about is it fair again.
There's a story that is told in the book Crucial Conversations, where there were two daughters that I think they were in Disney World, if I recall, and they came back. They had to go to the bathroom really, really badly. And they had been all day, and they finally got back, and they rushed in. And the father said, okay, you figure it out between yourselves who gets to go first. And they sat and argued for 25 minutes about who was going to be able to use the bathroom first. And if they had just stopped and kept their mind on what was important, which was actually getting in to use the bathroom, either one of them would have realized I'm making it take longer for me
Yes.
because I am arguing for my own rights. And how often do we do that where we think, well, I'm going to insist on my rights when what we really wanted all along was a good relationship? How often do we feel like I was really frustrated because I just wanted to spend time with you, but you weren't there and you let me down, and now I'm mad at you and I don't want to spend any time with you?
Now, you might be out there thinking, boy, I'll tell you though, I was really hurt by what happened. It was really difficult. And I don't know that we can reconcile or anything else. That doesn't mean you don't forgive. You are in control. You are in control of what you're doing. And forgiveness does not mean that you release the hurt. It doesn't mean that. Forgiveness means that you let it go. It doesn't mean that you release the hurt. I know it's there. I get it. But for your own sake, for your own benefit, and for the movement toward a reconciliation, toward getting together in any form, you need to forgive.
You mentioned the idea of control, and in fact, in a situation where somebody has hurt you, the only thing you can control, the only person you can control is yourself. You can't control what the other person did. You can't control how they treat you or how they think about you or what they did to you. You can't control the situation. You can't control the hurt. You can't control any of those things. But the one thing you do have control over is what is your response.
Yes. And this is really critical for the next point. Forgiveness does not require an apology unless you're the one that's doing the apologizing. It doesn't mean, well, if you do this, then I will forgive you. No. There's no restrictions, no rules. You don't have to say, well, you never apologize. Well, part of the reasons they don't apologize, they may not think they've done anything wrong. You're the person that's wrong. What are you doing that anyway? And what you're doing, I just don't accept. Therefore, I'm in the right. It's not your responsibility to try to get them to apologize. You need to let it go. Just when you forgive, you win.
Some people think if I just can get inside of their mind and understand what was motivating them, then I can have my own motivation to be able to forgive them. If I just understand what they've gone through in life, maybe I don't really understand how much they suffered. And once I understand that, then I'm going to be able to forgive them. One of the reasons we started with the story of Corey Ten Boom is I don't care what that guy went through in his life. I don't care how abusive his parents had been or what else had gone through. There is no excuse for what he did to her family. And yet, even in the midst of all of that, she still forgave him. And that is, forgiveness is a choice from ourselves, not based on the other person.
the next point is forgiveness is not an enablement. It doesn't mean I forgive you if somebody is out there and they're irresponsible and they continue to be irresponsible. That doesn't mean that that you've just given them the permission to continue to do that. But what it does mean is that you are not harboring the anger or hurt that they are causing you or the anger that they are creating for you. You're the one, it's you in control. It's you who can make yourself much more comfortable, much better, and possibly to mend the relationship.
When I was in college, I ended up becoming friends with some people that really had a heart for the homeless people in the city that I went to college in. And there was one homeless guy that came and he was kind of hanging around. And I remember I lent him my coat. And this coat meant a lot to me. You all had gotten this for me for Christmas. It was a nice coat, but he was cold. And I said, you can go ahead and wear the coat wherever, he had to go somewhere. And when he came back, he didn't have the coat. And I was very, it like, I think it was a few days or, whatever it was. The next time I saw him, oh, yeah, I'll get that back to you. Oh, yeah, I'll get that back to you. And finally, I don't know when it was, like a month later, or a month and a half later, he came back and he said, I've got to tell you something. I sold your coat because I needed the money. And I was furious. That hurt because that was a very meaningful gift. And I went and I did this and I said, well, I better practice what I preach. And I chose to forgive that guy. And I remember not too long after he came back, and we had that conversation. He said, hey, and I need some more help here right now. And I said, I'll tell you what. I forgive you for what you did. It really hurt, but I forgive you for what you did. And I understand you're in a tough situation. It was not okay, but I forgive you for what you did. But I'm not going to enable you by giving you the next thing when I myself don't have a lot of money to be able to get. I can't just give you this. So I don't feel like that's fair to either you or to me.
Which leads right into the next point. Forgiveness is not excusing bad behavior. It is forgiving even when the behavior is inexcusable. That's what forgiveness is.
So I sometimes do a thought exercise where I think to myself, what if some bad person were to come and do the worst thing imaginable to me? Take the people that were closest to me. And I was faced with that situation of having to forgive that person. Would I be willing to do it? And I think to myself, yes, I would be willing to do it. And you might think, oh, well, look at you. You would. No, this is not anything to build myself up or say, look at how great I am. No, I do this as a thought exercise beforehand because I know if I don't make the choice beforehand right now, if I don't think through if that were to happen, I'm going to forgive that person, then I know for a fact I'm not going to do it when it happens.
Yeah, the point here really is that forgiveness is not explaining away the hurt. It's working through the hurt. That's really what it's all about.
It's a response from us, not a response because of what they're doing to earn it.
Here's one you've heard. Well, I can forgive, but I can't forget. Well, guess what? Forgiveness is not forgetting. No. It is necessary to remember before you can forgive.
Just like when you pay off a debt, nobody says you don't remember that debt anymore, right? You paid off your house mortgage. Boy, I don't remember that house mortgage. No, of course you remember the house mortgage. But the bank is not saying, and I still feel like you kind of owe me that.
Next point. Forgiveness is not waiting for time to heal all wounds. It's clear that time doesn't heal all wounds. Some people harbor grudges for years and years and years and take it to their deathbed. Her forgiveness is not waiting for time to heal. You have to take that action.
I am convinced that many sicknesses and diseases and problems that we go through, not all of them, but many of them have their root in refusing to forgive. It's often said that unforgiveness or bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person hurts, hoping the other person dies from it.
Yeah, that's right. You know, some things we think forgiveness is a natural response. It's not a natural response. It's something that is something we have to force ourselves to really face. You have to face up to it, because if you're harboring something, you're not forgetting, and that's just going to continue. So can't wait for it to happen. And also, forgiveness is not a feeling.
No, it's a choice.
It's a
isn't it?
choice, exactly. Yeah.
It's an act of your will. You don't have to feel it, just like you don't have to feel it when you're forgiving with a checkbook.
And the last critical thing is that you have to remember that forgiveness is not conditional. I'll forgive you if. No, no. Forgiveness is.
You can't control what they do. You can only control what you do.
One last story. I can remember, but I don't remember which pope it was. A pope that was being paraded through the streets, and while he was being paraded through the streets, somebody shot him. Remember this? Oh,
that was John Paul.
Oh, it was John Paul. The first, second.
Oh, John Paul II.
Yeah, John Paul II.
I remember that. It was in the 80s, I believe.
And when he was shot, the very first thing he said was, "I forgive you." That's not the first thing I would have thought of. But that's power.
That is power.
Wow.
And if we can bring that power, if we can manifest that power, imagine what that can do in cultivating those positive relationships. We're glad you're here. Thank you for joining our podcast, and we hope that you have positive relationships in everything that you do. Join us again next week, and we would love it if you would pass on, maybe if this podcast influenced you or one of the other ones that you listen, maybe just drop a note to a friend over Facebook or post something. We would really appreciate that. That really helps us a lot.
And we'd like to hear from you. Tell us how you like the podcast. Tell us what you think. And you can reach us at transcendent@gmail.com. So with that, I just wanted to let you know, if this podcast has wasted any of your time, I'd like to ask you to forgive us.